And our next guest, well, you heard him already with a very intelligent question, but he also can give you answers, because hopefully he's going to tell us something about the future of comics. He's the founder of Cognito Comics, and it's Daniel Bowen. Woohoo! Oh, we should have had a last sound, nom nom kind of thing.
Nom nom nom. Nom nom nom. Nom nom.
And you're going to be talking about the CIA Operation Ajax.
Correct. That is exactly the name of my...
You're going to do it via a laptop, but it's actually made for the iPad as well.
Yeah, I'll be showing some iPad stuff today too. So hopefully people hear interactive things.
And are you all set and done? Are you ready to...
I've been here since 1 in the afternoon, so I'm about as ready as I'm going to be.
That's great to hear.
I'm a trooper. I'm a trooper.
Well, afterwards, you can also ask some more questions, but now I leave you to it. And yeah, here's Daniel Bowen.
Thank you. It's great to be here. How many people in the audience are students? Raise your hand. Oh, like most of you. How many people here are high right now? Really? Okay, if that was in America, it would be exactly the same number of hands up in the air. You guys are just used to it. We just legalized pot in Colorado, and I'm thinking about probably flying. Yeah, it's a good thing. And I'm thinking about actually flying directly back there. So we'll figure it out. Thank you for having me. My name is Daniel Bowen. I'm the founder of Cognito Comics, and you know, all the way here from San Francisco. So if you just want to Twitter along or ask questions, you know, adjust my thingy. How do I look?
It's just that your ear thingy is coming to your microphone, and I know there's microphone people in the building.
They're judging us, aren't they? Yeah, judging people. Well, after going on after audio, guys, you can't. Yeah, better. How's that? Is that? Do I look?
Don't move your head.
Don't move my head. Okay. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. I feel so fussed over it. So good. All right. Anyway, so thank you for having me. It's fabulous to be here. And basically, you know, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. So who I am. So my background is in graphic design and video games. I consider myself a storyteller who works at the intersection of art and technology. So I've worked for Electronic Arts, I've worked for Activision. Right now I'm sort of moonlighting for Disney Imagineering, helping them out with some stuff down there. And I spent the last 4.5 years of my life on a very large project called CIA Operation Ajax. So essentially I wanted to apply my unique background to tell a story of historical significance. So what I'm going to talk about today is sort of the genesis of Ajax as a creative project, and also frame it in a sort of a cultural context as well. And try to give you guys a little bit of a behind-the-scenes sort of theme of this stuff, because we've seen a lot of video today, which I love. I think video is awesome. And this is a bit of a departure, because video is linear and very much sort of the same format we've had for almost 100 years now. And essentially what Ajax is a new way of actually creating narrative in the age of interactive. So for those who don't know the project, I'm going to show the trailer, and we'll go from there.
Introducing Operation Ajax for the iPad, based on actual events of the CIA's involvement in overthrowing the Iranian government. A bold and original interactive graphic novel that redefines digital comics and the art of storytelling in 210 handcrafted pages. Navigating the comic is easy and intuitive. Tap or swipe to read the next page or to go back. Touching the middle of the screen gives you more control and lets you dive deeper into the rich history surrounding the story. At the bottom of the screen, we can flip through pages. It's also easy to jump to different chapters. A handy guide can be called up to provide a synopsis of the cast of characters. Occasionally, you'll see a star while reading. Touch it to pull up additional information about key story points. Historical documents that have only recently been declassified, and even newsreels from the era. Operation Ajax by Cognito Comics. Experience it at the App Store.
Okay. Cool. So, thank you. So that's our product trailer. I'll actually be demoing the app a little later on. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about where this project started. Back in the early 2000s, when the United States went to war with Iraq, I had a lot of problems with that, personally. And I didn't quite feel like I was getting all the answers as to why, the rhetoric that was being fed to us by our government at the time. It's a little bit easier to have this conversation with an international audience. But anyway, so Stephen Kinzer wrote a bunch of these really great books that sort of chronicled all of these other countries that the United States had overthrown or messed with, starting with Hawaii in 1898 and all the way through the Middle East. And the story that gripped me the most was All the Shah's Men, which essentially was a story about Iran. And I thought, how cool would it be to harness the power of games and interactive content to bring the story to a wider audience? And so that's basically what I set off to do. At the time, doing a video game wouldn't quite work. I had just finished working in the console era, and this is still the PlayStation 2 sort of time of frame. So games cost millions of dollars to make, and they didn't really do narrative terribly effectively. And this is before mobile and social and all those sort of things. So I wasn't really sure that'd be the right format. So I thought a graphic novel would be a better way to go about it, despite not being able to write or illustrate anything. So this is one of the first influences I ever had as a graphic novel reader. I don't know how many people here actually read comic books? Okay, a fair amount of you. Awesome. This is Torso by Brian Michael Bendis, and this book totally changed my perspective. I actually discovered this book in 2000 while abroad in Scotland on a semester abroad, and I had no idea that comics could look this way. I grew up with Marvel and DC stuff, and here was a historically accurate book, set in the Prohibition era, and everything was in black and white, and it was totally graphic, and it was just very generous with how it used page layout. And I think that we're here talking at sort of a motion design festival. And I find sort of comics and printed media a very interesting foundation for that, because it is design at its sort of purest essence, its simplest format. And this book was taking design sort of to a new level by using both pages across as a single spread and bringing in newspaper clippings and things like that. It was a really cool way to tell a story, and basically this was a huge influence on me. And I remember thinking, how cool would it be if we could influence books like this in more of an interactive way with, really being generous with how the pages flow. In Torso, it's interesting because as you sort of descend into madness, the thing starts to go sideways, and you can, sort of rotate the book to read. It was very, very innovative. So essentially what that meant for us, because we started out doing a printed book and then decided to go interactive later, is we created a 210-page historically accurate graphic novel in print format, and then an interactive iPad experience as well. So we were going to need assets that would satisfy both of these formats. So what that essentially meant is that as somebody coming from the land of video games and sort of digital media, I had to learn the rule of comics, and it wasn't very easy. Basically, making games is different than making comics, which should not be a big surprise for most of you here. The team in the top left is the team that made Deus Ex Human Revolution. It's about 80 people, and you've got all sorts of different roles from programming and design. Games is very multidisciplinary, and interface is also a big part of that. Contrast that with the guys who made Watchmen in the bottom right. It's a very different culture. And I think what this means is that comics at their heart are artisanal. They're basically works of art that have a lot of ownership built in. It's an industry that doesn't necessarily make a lot of money. It's really about being able to take ownership as a creator. And if you're the artist on a comic book, you basically have a tremendous creative voice in the process. If you're working on a video game, you're one of many different creative roles, and you sort of fit into a larger team structure. And so it's a different mentality from a production perspective of somebody who takes creative control and ownership and necessarily doesn't get well paid for it, but can take ownership over their product versus working in the games industry and being part of a team. There's some basic rules to comics, and this is going to be very obvious to people who read it before. But basically, in American comics, we go left to right, top to bottom, 6 panels on a page average. And there's different language and structure to this format. When to use insets, when to use splash pages. The most important part of traditional comics, though, is the page turn, because you have to pace the story this way. Books have been around for a very long time, and comics, I think, do very, very well in the physical format because they're built to take advantage of it. It's almost like we see this sort of general trend of things going into digital now, and comics really does benefit from being a tangible medium. And so we had to adapt and learn and create our story in the same way. So right here what we have, and like I said before, Ajax was created in print format first. We've got 4 pages from Ajax in inks, just so you can see it a little bit better. But basically, the gray dots are the start and ending points from top to bottom, left to right. So you can sort of see that the gray dots kind of flow you through the story throughout this sort of, character arriving on an airplane, big protest, character jumps in the car, and then on the next page, you see sort of the aftermath of that with President Truman. To sort of apply a little bit of a play-by-play theme to this, the red circles are sort of your focal points, and the green arrows are the start and ending points. So you can kind of see it flowing all the way down the page, bouncing around. This is essentially how your eye would travel across the page. It's kind of like there's a built-in sense of motion without actually having any motion in it. And this was really helpful for us because by having to learn these rules of this traditional static medium, it really set up a tremendous amount of guidance for us doing something that had motion and had composition as well. And it was very effective. One of the things that you tend to sacrifice when you go to mobile with comic books is that page structure. With printed books, it's not really such an issue because you can reflow text almost infinite ways. There's no page break technique to a printed text-based book. But in comics, that's like tantamount. And you can kind of see here with the iPhone frame sort of grabbing one panel of a full page of Ajax. And there's different ways to mitigate this. There's different ways to deal with that. But essentially, I think when you look at the barriers facing digital comics and storytelling in that way, the biggest challenge we face is that the phone is just a very different experience from a screen size and from an attention economy system from a physical printed book. So this is a Marvel Comics way of sort of dealing with that. This is Comixology's app. You guys should recognize this. This is basically them figuring out a way to come up with the best of both worlds between wanting that full page but only getting a small amount of real estate to show. You guys, is this working? Awesome. You can like beatbox on it, almost. Almost. Well, anyway, so basically it comes down to presentation. How are you going to present this content in a way that makes it accessible? Has anyone here actually tried reading comics on their phone using Comixology? A handful of you guys, not many. In the States, this is basically like the standard way of doing it. And I'm not saying this is the best way, but right now it's a way that's definitely sort of served the in-between and the sacrifice of having to use something that's much smaller to read something that's typically much bigger. So you could basically retitle my entire presentation, How to Add Motion and Sound to Comics Without Making Them Suck. Because when you actually try to go deeper than that flat pan and scan experience, it can tend to break down quite a bit. So what we really wanted to see here was how to honor the reading experience. So comics are reading experiences, no spoken dialogue. Books allow you to advance the story at your own pace. They're not film experiences. Unfortunately, I think most of the innovations we've seen in comics as we bring in the tools of motion and the tools of sound is that those projects are given typically to motion graphics people. And I love motion graphics people. I really do. I think it's a tremendous industry. But unfortunately, the people making the creative choices when these projects come over don't really understand how comics work. And we get stuff that kind of looks like this. Oh, well, before I go into that, just to talk a little bit about how you can actually apply that in a realistic way. Has anyone here heard of the cinemagraph before? You guys might recognize this, like one or two people. Basically what happens is as we use DSLR cameras to take video, we're now getting this hybrid medium evolving, which allows you to loop motion into a photograph. And just like when you bring photos into the digital space, sometimes some of that stuff gets lost. And this is really a bad example of a cinemagraph. This is really distracting. The taxis are sort of like looping, very obviously, and all the people are like stuck, in the middle of the road. It doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't really make the photo better for being digital. But if you think about sort of reapplying that in a way that might make it work. This is sort of your exhibit B, right? Same concept, taxis, in a cityscape, but done in a much more subtle and I think much more enriching and deep way. So when I look at the idea of adding motion to comic books, I think it's sort of the same concept. You have to understand the essence of the original medium in order to enhance it for digital and actually take use of all the digital tools in a way that's effective. So I'm going to show you the sort of what we've seen typically from motion comics, and I apologize in advance. It's going to be a little cringeworthy.
So tell me, which stage of grieving is this? Denial. Strike a nerve, Summers!
We don't need to see any more of that. Sorry. Basically, it's not terribly good. It ends up being sort of like lo-fi animation and something that's sort of in between, what would traditionally be a great comics experience or a great animation experience, and you get sort of the worst of both worlds. So we wanted to add motion and sound while respecting the rules of comics. So to sort of further exemplify this, I'm going to switch now to the iPad. So bear with me for a minute while I switch over, and we'll take you guys through the app, and you can kind of see what that actually means. very high tech here. Let's see, that should come up. All right. And plugging in the audio. There we go. Alrighty, so what you're seeing now should be essentially the screen of the iPad. So imagine this is actually handheld. So it's essentially a book experience. It won't actually advance the story unless you tap the edges of the screen. So you can actually like reset it and go backwards, and it kind of plays out at a controlled pace. And the idea here is that the animation is replicating what would otherwise be sort of like a print experience enhanced. So I don't know if you're actually reading along, but just to sort of take you through this to kind of understand what this sort of looks like and feels like. So we just saw those pages in traditional sort of like, inks, and this is what it became in the digital experience. So every time you introduce a panel, the composition will sort of change itself to give you an optimized experience for that much content on the screen. It took a lot of trial and error to figure this out. It was not obvious the best way to apply this, and we were lucky to have so much time to experiment and essentially do R&D to figure out what was going to serve the experience here. So we have all these angry protesting Iranians who are quite upset with our American diplomat who's just arrived on an airplane, and things don't go so well, and the mounted police show up. So there's President Truman getting the news. Not good news. I'm going to skip around a little bit and show you guys some more of this stuff. So let's see here. So I'll show you one of my favorite pages when it comes to animation. Actually, let's talk a little bit about the sound first. I think this is going to be really cool. So essentially, this is a paced experience. That was the wrong page. Let's try that again. Where is it? I want this page. There we go. Cool, so pay attention to the audio here. It just sort of like stays constant until you touch it. And then on a tap, it just gets pitch shifted up ever so slightly. And then down again. So we're really rewarding animation, sort of giving you a little bit of interactivity with every touch. And it's nice to sort of have that subtlety to it. I think it really makes it a deeper experience. To talk a little bit about some more of this sort of dynamic composition, we're squeezing elements together, and then every panel that comes in moves just a little bit in the same direction as the panels that preceded it. So you get a little bit of a hint from the content inside those panels, which is very, very cool. And so I'll just sort of fast forward with my thumb down so you can kind of see a little bit more of how this unfolds. This is a 210-page book, so part of why it took so long is that we had to, design audio, interactive audio across the whole thing. So this is the Shah and the Prime Minister having an argument about the military. And this is a kind of an interesting moment here because this whole thing's taking place inside of a game engine. And you wouldn't actually know it because we use a flat camera, and there's more I can talk about later on that. But you get just a hint of the 3D-ness when we go to sort of this one shot right here. And so I think from a motion design standpoint, this is actually really cool because it's a new way of presenting content that isn't typically experienced by an audience. And so if you watch the pieces of paper here, they all rotate ever so slightly on the way out. So we didn't really get a chance to take advantage of the 3D so much, but it's kind of a cool feature of the thing that I'd love to explore more in the future. So I'll just go through to sort of this next interactive portion here. It is historical, and we were able to actually take advantage of the fact that we're on a digital platform and we can embed all sorts of additional content outside of a core narrative. So occasionally you'll see these stars while reading, and you can tap them to pull up additional information. And so here's a document that he was reading. So throughout the story, at key moments, we want to give you that option to dig deeper, get curious, and find out more. What happened sort of partway through production is we realized we were going to be on the iPad, and it gave us sort of a bolt from the blue realization that we could actually embed all of our reference material right into the app. This is a very well-documented story. There's newsreel footage, there's photos, there's historical documents. So I actually built a sort of piece in the narrative that allowed us to elegantly embed this additional information. And so our narrator's a historically sort of fictitious CIA operative, and he's our window in, and he's reflecting on his life. And here he is sort of pulling files off of a shelf and sort of looking through them. We thought it'd be cool if you could actually explore those yourself. So this is going to go sideways for a second. Normally you would rotate the iPad in your hand, so just bear with me. But if you want to find out any more about, say, Churchill, for example, the whole thing sort of themed like a CIA document. Oh my God, it totally goes sideways. That's awesome. So basically, yeah, you can, like read photos and other documents like that in a way that makes it accessible. And I thought that was a really cool way to try to, if you're going to make people read large blocks of text, you got to, sneak it by them a little bit and make them go, ooh, I'm doing things, and that makes it, somehow richer and deeper. There's also, like I said, actually declassified documents. I added the coffee stain because they were very ugly. So now it looks a little bit more like, from the 50s. But there you go. You can actually read the list, the laundry list of all the things the CIA did. Wow, it's huge. You can like see all the pixelization. But anyway, you can actually like read these actual documents that reference the story and vice versa. So I thought that was kind of a cool angle. And there's actually all this newsreel footage as well. So I'm just going to go back to the book here and play one of those for you. You can kind of see how those will tie together. But we didn't know that we'd be able to put all these in, and it was cool to kind of come up with a narrative hook, if you will, that allowed us to elegantly weave those different parts of the app together. So I'm just going to speed by this section right here and kind of see how this looks. So this is just a little portion on the Red Scare. Halfway through the book, we start talking about what was happening in America at the time. And so this is just a little montage that kind of gives you an idea of that. So Americans responding to the Red Scare and things going on in China. Our artists kind of indulged that one a little bit. So anyway, so they talk about it. Well, what effect did the Red Scare actually have? And we go, well, it had one very important effect.
It was election year in America, and Adlai Stevenson,
essentially, we have Eisenhower getting elected. Oh, someone tweeted about me. That's cool. So let's speed through here. Go away, Twitter. There you go. Thanks. I'm going to speed through to the end here just so you can kind of see.
Never in doubt. It was a landslide for the Eisenhower-Nixon ticket, and America's resounding vote of confidence in its leader.
So check out the dual victory. There it is. And then we cut directly from that to back to the comic, and you see that Eisenhower's got his hands up. So that was really cool. So, it just sort of serendipitously worked out that way. I ended up finding these videos. Oh, that's a lot louder. I ended up finding these videos online, and I was able to actually sort of weave them effortlessly into the app. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my presentation. So again, bear with me for 1 minute. All right, so I'm going to speed through the rest of this here. So I talked a little bit about dynamic composition. That was really like our key magic moment for flowing this thing through. And essentially what that means is that a single page of the comic book would be sort of flown through Photoshop like an animatic. And so this is my way of giving animation direction to the animators. And so it's basically just a very simple way of taking that comics page you saw and breaking it down with sort of very minimal suggestions, but it's really about these rest points. So each of these rest points is actually replicated by the app itself. And so I thought that was a really cool way to sort of, provide guidance. What that means is our workflow is actually not that different from traditional comics. We start with, storyboarding, we start with sketches, and we visualize this stuff. We do what's called a layered ink. And then from that layered ink, we essentially break everything into pieces, and we do what's, the final page with colors and lettering. But there's one small difference. Every page is broken into panels. Every panel is broken into pieces. And so there's actually a lot of layers that go into a single page from Ajax. And so you guys saw this page earlier. This is a 2-page spread of what that scene looks like from the book as a print format comics page. And it's all these texture atlases where we had to break all the elements apart. And so each one's a 1024 map, and there's actually 4 of these for that page. So there's quite a lot of elements that go into that. So, I don't remember the exact number, but between 5,000 and 6,000 pieces of individual artwork for the entire book. It's actually quite labor intensive. And so essentially, we use a team-based illustration approach to give us the best of both worlds, because a traditional illustrator, while awesome and beautiful, can only go so fast. And there's a problem with that. So we had to use a team-based approach to kind of speed things along. So we got reliability and speed in exchange for a consistent visual style. So in order to mitigate the visual style issues of like having multiple artists drawing the same comic book, we used the same colors across every page, and that kind of solidified it into a single-looking composition. So that means that it took us 3 years to make a 210-page graphic novel, and the script alone took 2 years. So it was very time-intensive. That was one of the biggest lessons for us. To talk briefly about sound, and we had a great sort of primer for this from the film side, from Ant Food. Basically, we wanted our sound to support a reading experience first and foremost. So just enough sound to fill in the gaps. It was like a whole new sort of structure for this type of experience that hadn't really been created before. So once you add sound to a book, you don't go silent unless you're making a dramatic point. And so you have to kind of understand, well, if I'm going to take sound out of the piece now, there's a dramatic sort of attachment to that as well. And when to use room tone, when to use music, when to use sound effects, all this stuff has to be chosen and picked as part of your toolbox for storytelling, whereas before in traditional comics, you don't really have to worry about that. To talk a little bit about the value of user experience, has anyone here not familiar with UX? Okay, you guys are not raising your hands. Okay, so 2, 3 people. I mean, UX is huge. I can't say enough about this. User experience when you're making something that's interactive, you're making software, is tremendous. And again, I'm a little bit jealous looking at my sort of like creative brethren from the film side of things, because there's no concern about an audience being able to take in a music video or a movie. And you basically sit down in your seat and you watch, or you watch at your computer or on your phone. But when you're making something interactive, you got to be able to reach in there and actually move it and make it go by. And we didn't really understand that at first. We were really focused on making the story really good and making the artwork really good and making the motion and sound really good. And we really ignored user experience, and it's a big problem because if you can't access the comic and read it, I mean, you're on an iPad, so if you don't really have buttons, right? You have to have gestures, and you have to create sort of an understanding with your audience so that you don't have to have like arrow keys on the screen at all times. And we finally started to figure out that this was actually really important, and it really helped us create what I think is a very effective application of interface on top of a narrative. And you'll see a lot of experiments going forward with this stuff, but it's going to be a tremendous concern, and definitely something that I think everyone here should be aware of as you start to go out there and try to flex your muscles creatively in the industries that are emerging. Essentially, you have a layer of UX on top of a layer of presentation on top of story. And if each of those layers isn't totally solid, if the UX isn't good, you're never going to be able to experience all of the art and all of the sound and all of the motion. And if that isn't compelling, then you're not going to be able to read the story. And if the story sucks, what was the point of all of it in the first place, right? So, essentially, if you think about the UX for Ajax, this is just a sort of a document that I created when I was working out all the kinks of this thing, sort of halfway through production. But you can see the story at the top, which is sort of a linear experience, more or less. But where do you drop in all these hints and all of these suggestions to the audience on how to access all these extra features and make them accessible? It takes a lot of planning. It's not obvious. And I think the culture of software is a really interesting one because more and more these days the stuff we consume and the things we're making is becoming software. You think about all the things these mobile devices can do. Not only can they read books and play games and music and film and all that sort of stuff, but they're also our communication devices, right? Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and phone calls and email. So we have a collision of these two spaces where not only are we consuming stories on them, but we're also expressing ourselves as well. And there's all sorts of new stuff coming out now. I don't know if people here are familiar with Madefire. They're a big sort of motion book sort of people kind of doing this stuff now. Ryan Woodward's Bomb of the Ninth is a really great app to check out. Hero's Duty for Wreck-It Ralph, same technology, a lot of the same team members that worked on my project. And if you guys have iPads, please check out Upgrade Soul. It's awesome. It's by Eric Lawyer. It's built in Unity, and it's all sort of building on the inspiration of Ajax. I've actually talked to most of these people because they saw my work and were really impressed by it. It's really an interesting space to watch as this stuff evolves going forward. So I think it really raises the question, as media goes to these mobile devices, where do we go from here? Ajax, like I said, is built in Unity, which is, a company fairly local, which is really cool. A game engine that can essentially run any type of experience. So everything's in 3D, and as you start to blend together all these things, I think it raises a lot of questions about what does that mean, because, not only is our media blending together, but it's being experienced now on television sets and, via the app ecosystem and other things like that. Just to sort of show you some of the assets we created for Ajax using video game culture as a background, we did every face as a high-res ZBrush bust. And if we were actually doing a game component to this, it'd be really cool to have 3D characters in a comic book. This was just for drawing reference, but we produced, 32 heads that we could pose at any angle just to help our artists out, get the likenesses correct. Show of hands, how many people here know AirPlay? A handful of you guys? Okay. This is a really important technology. This is allowing the stuff on your mobile devices to now show up on TVs. And so suddenly what you're seeing now is that not only is it a handheld experience when you're out of the house, But that film or that music video can also be sort of, experienced on the go and in a handheld modality. And so we're seeing a blending of both the living room and the handheld experience. So this is a quote from John Lasseter. He's the director of Toy Story, one of the founding members of Pixar. He says, technology inspires art, and art challenges the technology. And I think we're at a very interesting tipping point now, because we have more technology at our fingertips than we've ever had before. It's fascinating the way that stuff goes. And so, as we start to work as filmmakers and creative people, I think that it's going to be, I really hope you guys as students continue to push the envelope around this stuff and try to do deeper and more expressive things than just working in the predefined boxes we've had as media creators in the past. So I think, going forward, you want to do things that are meaningful, remember your roots, remember traditional format. If we hadn't done Operation Ajax as a traditional print format book first, we definitely would have been successful at making the app. So, I don't know if we have time for Q&A or not, but that's basically me. If you'd like to know more about the project, feel free to email me or come up to me after. And, thanks so much for having me, guys. Cheers.
Thank you, Daniel. Actually, there's no time for Q&A, but I think they have to make a swap anyway for techniques.